in order to restore the lost empire. On the other hand, Russia is historically a region of civilizational fault line between the countries of Western civilization and the countries of Eastern civilization, is a torn state in terms of cultural identity and has maintained its integrity for centuries only due to its authoritarian political regime and constantly produces numerous conflicts around its borders. Methodology we use. I propose to consider this war through the perspective of Francis Fukuyama's concept of identity politics using Samuel Huntington's civilization approach. I mean Huntington's conception of the New World Order, in which the most dangerous conflicts will be between people belonging to different civilizations and cultures. We also involve the ideas of Richard Jenkins, Sinisha Melashevich, Rogers Brubaker, and Anthony Smith about identity, about the interconnection between national identity and cultural heritage, and Anthony Smith's cultural concept of nation. In the context of our investigation, Eric Fromm's theory of totalitarian society and his concept of escape from freedom is also important. Introduction. On February 24, 2 years ago, Russia launched a full-scale military invasion of Ukraine as the next stage of the Russian-Ukrainian war from 2014 to the present day. What was the most surprising? The Russians really believed that they could capture Ukrainian in 3 days, no, at most 3 weeks. The Ukrainian state survived, the Ukrainian army fought back, and Ukrainian citizens resisted in every day possible. The Ukrainian political nation continues to resist. Protest against the Russian occupation in Russian-speaking Ukrainian regions. The extraordinary cruelty of Russian soldiers to the Ukrainian civilians. I'm sorry, colleagues. Intentional destruction of museums and cultural heritage. And however, the most interesting thing is the justification of military aggression by the Russian authorities. Ukraine poses an existential threat to the Russian Federation. Let me illustrate these points. The top right photo is from Melitopol. The other two from Kherson. And the poster you see in the man's hands is written, Russians, go home.
I'm sorry.
We don't see him.
It seems that presentation doesn't move. We all still see the slide number 1.
One moment. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's try again. Because I see exchanging slides. Do you see? Next slides.
Yeah, now we see this Russians go home.
Go home.
Yes.
You can
No.
choose another Ekran for demonstration. Ekran with presentation, not with in inner part of presentation.
Yeah, just click by the mouse to
Yes.
the left.
Yeah, we understand this problem.
What do you see now? No. I'm sorry. And
Yeah, now yeah, it's good.
yes, good.
Yeah. Just like this.
Thank you. So, you see very interesting processes because residents of Kherson, for example, went on protest demonstrations for 3 weeks, for 3 months, I'm sorry, and the occupying Russian authorities stopped these peaceful demonstrations only by shooting them. So it was very very great actions of these people. So cruelty of Russian soldiers to the Ukrainian civilians, what was also and is also very, very awful from all points of view. Individual and mass graves of Ukrainian citizens that were found after the deoccupation of the cities of Kyiv and parts of Donetsk and Lugansk regions, we find such graves in all liberated cities and villages. When I look at this photos, I recall similar mass graves of Ukrainian people killed by starvation. I mean the Holodomor of 1932 and 1933, and the graves of repressed people during the 1930s and 1940s in the Soviet Union. And near Kiev, there is a memorial complex, well known in Ukraine, memorial complex to the victims of Soviet repressions in Ukraine called Bykivnya. It's a huge forest, and at the same time, it's a huge cemetery where people were buried in the forest just in the same way. And ethnically, these people were not only Ukrainians, but also Poles, Jews, and everyone else who didn't want to be Russian. And almost 100 years have passed since then, but the main principle has not changed. If you don't want to be Russian, you must be killed. Pay attention to this film, Intercepted. It is a documentary film by Oksana Karpovich based on real intercepted conversation, phone calls between Russian soldiers and their relatives. It was presented at this year's Berlin International Film Festival. It shows clearly that this war not only Putin's war, because when you hear now how a wife encourages her own husband to rape Ukrainian women, or when a mother asks her son to take someone's laptop because her granddaughter is going to first grade this year, or when a son tells his mother that he likes torturing people, Ukrainian people, and the mother answers him that he's a hero, that these people are not human, she means Ukrainians, and that she would do the same things if she were at war, you realize that this is not only Putin's war. Next slides demonstrate intentional destruction of museums and cultural heritage. And what I want to stress, Russians don't spare expensive missiles to destroy Ukrainian museums, libraries, memorial complexes, church buildings of various religions. They don't spare missiles to destroy the cultural heritage of Ukraine. And you see destroyed museums of Ukrainian philosopher Grigory Skovroda, or for example, Ukrainian painter Katerina Rimachenko in the Kyiv region, or Ukrainian general Roman Shukhevich, or for example, Ukrainian painter Polina Rayko, or Arkhip Kuinji Art Museum. And in the left picture, you see Kamenska Sich Natural Park. It's also very, very interesting from the historical point region. So it's also very, very interesting because all this is consciously, absolutely consciously. And I would like to draw attention to the very interesting project, Religion on Fire. This project was initiated by NGO Workshop of Academic Religious Studies in March 2024 and is still ongoing. The project team collects and documents information about a religious building destroyed and damaged as a result of the war. And these are not only Christian churches. These are religion buildings of various religions. And my little personal comment, a few weeks ago, I was very very surprised to find out that in the Ukrainian army, along with Christian of various denominations, Jews, Muslims, there are also Ukrainian Krishnaites, Ukrainian soldiers. They all fight together and defend the country, Ukraine, because they are Ukrainians and they don't want to be Russians. And the last introductory slides, you can see how this existential threat to the existence of the Russian Federation looks like. This orange part is Ukraine. And according to the Moscow, we are very, very dangerous to the Russian Federation. So we move on to the main part of my presentations. Russia's war in Ukraine is a war for identity and appropriation of cultural tradition. The existence of an independent Ukrainian state is an existential challenge for the existence of Russian imperial narratives, but not for the existence of the modern Russian Federation. By the very fact of its existence, the Ukrainian state, which is reclaiming its history and culture, very clearly raises the following question: what is Russia itself? Who are Russians in fact, and what historical and cultural roots they really have? In other words, Ukraine is raising the issue of the cultural identity. The Ukrainian European cultural identity and history stolen by Russia. We argue that this is precisely the main problem with the cultural identity of the modern Russian Federation in Moscow. Of 500 years, if you take into account the period of formation of the Moscow Duchy in the 15th century within the Golden Horde, Russians leaders want to rule a country with a 1,000-year-old history and cultural tradition, dating back to the early Middle Ages, and consider it a normal practice in the 21st century to appropriate Ukrainian 1,000-year-old culture and history, in particular the history of medieval Ukraine, Kievan Rus, by capturing Ukrainian territories. I stress this: Russia needs appropriation of Ukrainian cultural heritage and historical tradition because on their basis, the Russian leadership built the imperial narratives of the modern Russian Federation. The next slide is dedicated also to a very interesting project, the Stolen Treasures. The Text Information Agency conducted a study of the online expositions of two Russia's largest and most famous museums, Hermitage and State Historical Museum. According to the study of the online collections of the Hermitage and State Historical Museum of Russia, text revealed 110,000 artifacts that had been exported from the territory of modern Ukraine to Russia in different historical periods. And these are not only these are only online expositions from only two Russian museums, and all these historical artifacts are presented there as Russian. In fact, they are all stolen by Russians. You see the quote: not only are the removed artifacts intended to demonstrate the mystical connection of the modern Russia and the Kievan Rus, but also to show the deep historical roots of the Russian people who have been trying to appropriate the ancient history of Ukraine, the Paleolithic era, Tripilya culture, and ancient and Scythian era. So, a brief historical overview for understanding the historical context. I would like to draw your attention to several important dates, important for the development of Russia, Ukraine, Poland, Lithuania, and for the Eastern Europe as a whole. The Moscow Duchy, as a pro-state unit, was formed within the Golden Era in the 14th, 15th centuries. The Moscow rulers were the most successful in collecting tribute in favor of the Golden Horde from their own population and from the population of neighboring territories, for which they received and secured the Hans label of Rand Dukedom. It was the time of the formation of the Moscow model of state leadership as an apparatus of violence and coercion. It's the time of the birth of political authoritarianism of the modern Russian Federation. This Moscow apparatus of violence and coercion is still the basis of the state leadership in Russia. And first important date in event, 1478, it's time when the Novgorod Republic was captured by the Moscow Duchy. Consequences: Novgorod Republic became the first victim of Moscow's aggression, aggressive foreign policy toward its neighbors. This was the first confrontation between democracy, Novgorod Republic, and autocracy, the Moscow Duke. Democracy proved to be weaker, which only development of the Moscow Duchy and its transformation into the Moscow state. In fact, Moscow has worked out a mechanism for strengthening its position by capturing a neighboring country. Second important date and event, 1480, liberation from the Golden Horde dependence. But Moscow continued to pay tribute to the Crimea Khanate until 17th centuries. After the successful absorption of the Novgorod Republic, a part of the former Kievan Rus, and liberation from the Golden Horde dependence, Moscow first faced the problem of cultural identity. This is the starting point of the escape from themselves. The Moscow rulers with the cultural background, one of the vassal states within the Mongol Tatar Empire, which continues to pay tribute to the Crimea Khan as the successor of the Golden Horde. Therefore, they began searching to be proud of, taking advantage of the fact that the Moscow Duke, Kievan Dukes, and the colonization of Novgorod, they decided to try on the role of the gatherer of the lands of Kievan Rus. It's important to remember that every ruling dynasty in modern Europe has a dynastic connection to the Kievan Dukes. However, no European country makes territorial claims to Ukraine on this basis. The following important events: annexation of the Kazan and Astrakhan Khanates, the beginning of the recolonization of the lands of the former colonizers, and the making of territorial claims to the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, which included the lands of Kievan Rus as a result of the Mongol invasion. 1569, the union of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and the Kingdom of Poland, and as a result, the formation of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, unique monarchical confederation of two countries headed by an elected king. This country was a very interesting example of democracy and parliamentarism of the early modern era. Next important date, the formation of the Ukrainian Cossack state, Hetmanat, as a result of the liberation war of Bogdan Khmelnytsky. In fact, the Cossack state separated from the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and this event can be seen as the first internal division of this country. The success and sustainability of democracy, both today and in the past, lies in the strict following of laws and justice. And if this balance is disturbed, then democracy is defeated. I think this event changed the direction of the further history of the entire Eastern European region. Next defining event, Peryaslav Council, 1654. A military political agreement between Hetmanat and the Moscow state. The agreement that no one has seen, which gives space for discussions about its content. Moscow claims that this is the agreement on reunification, but the agreement doesn't exist in the form of a document. In a recent interview with American journalist Tucker Carlson, a well-known interview, Mr. Putin showed letters from Bogdan Khmelnytsky, but not the reunification agreement. Another interesting point, 3 years after the Pereyaslav Council, Bogdan Khmelnytsky died. He was only 61 years old. His son was young and not so authoritative, and he couldn't keep power in his hands. So this date became the starting point for Moscow's gradual absorption of the territories of the Ukrainian Cossack state. In fact, it took them a little over 100 years. Now, Moscow is trying to repeat this, to divide Ukrainian regions in parts. Next important date, in 1724, the Moscow state got a new name, the Russian Empire, originally All Russian Empire. Since then, the terms Little Russia, modern Ukraine, and Great Russia, modern Russia, Moscow state have been used. These terms were necessary for the Moscow leadership to identify themselves, the population of the Moscow state, as Russians, Great Russians, who they had never been before. It was the Ukrainians who called themselves Rusins from the Middle Ages until the 20th century. And since the Cossack Liberation War, also called themselves Cossacks. The word Russia is a Greek pronunciation of the name Rus. The Patriarch of Constantinople referred to the territories of the Kievan Orthodox Metropolitanate as Great Russia, and the territories of the Galician Volhynian Orthodox Metropolitanate as Little Russia. That's initially, it was church terminology, and modern Russia had nothing to do with the names Great Russia and Little Russia. Moscow leadership appropriated this naming as the name of a country, the Russian Empire, having appropriated Ukrainian Kievan Rus territories before that. In 1685, the Moscow Patriarch annexed the Kievan Metropolitanate. Next 3 dates and events, destruction of the Hetmanat, destruction of the Zaporizhzhia Sich, military and administrative center of the Ukrainian Cossacks, a Cossack city-state with a republican form of government, and then 3 divisions of the Polish, Lithuanian, and Commonwealth by 3 autocratic empires, Austria, Prussia, and Russia. The modern Russian imperial historical narrative was created only in the middle of the 19th century, Kievan Rus, Russian Empire, Soviet Union, Russian Federation. After the final absorption of the territories of the Hetmanat, the central part of Kievan Rus, and the annexation of a part of the former Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which at the time include a significant part of the lands of former Rus. The 19th century is a golden age of Russian history, the triumph of autocracy and imperialism. The Russians want to return to this golden age, and they want to bring back the whole world. Now we can move to the main philosophical part of the presentation. So, Russian Empire in a world without empires. The Russian historical imperial narrative was formed in the middle of the 19th century. For example, the multi-volume works of Nikolai Karamzin's History of the Russian State and Sergei Solovyov's History of Russia from the earliest times. In order to fix up the historiographical inconsistency in the names Rus and Moscow state, Solovyov proposed a division into Kievan Rus and Moscow Rus, thus consolidating and I'm sorry, colleagues, it's hard, legitimizing the statement about political and cultural heredity between the Ukrainian medieval state of Rus and the Russian Empire. In the early 20th century, Ukrainian historian Mikhail Grushevsky, in his History of Ukraine Rus, refuted these Russian narratives, and Russian encroachment of Ukrainian history, describing the political history of Ukrainian lands and showing the process of formation of the modern Ukrainian nation from the time of Rus in the context of European history through incorporation with the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and without significant influence from Russia until almost the end of the 18th century, when after the final division of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, a large part of the modern Ukraine came under Russian rule. But for the modern Russian leadership, the 19th century is a golden age of the Russian Empire to which they seek to return. In the 20th century, the Soviet Union just repeated this imperial narrative, adding the thesis of three brothers people, Russians, Ukrainians, and Belarusians, three branches of one Russian people. In fact, after the Second World War, the Soviet Union was the only empire that not only didn't disintegrate, but also increased its territories and spheres of influence. This is the reason why the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 is perceived by the Moscow leadership as the greatest catastrophe of the 20th century. Not the two world wars, not Holocaust, not Holodomor, and other numerous crimes against humanity committed in different countries during the 20th century, the bloody century, according to Miroslav Popovich, Ukrainian philosopher, but the collapse of the Soviet Union. The collapse of the Soviet Union clearly indicates three things. First, the Russian Federation is an empire at the stage of semi-disintegration, which deals a fatal blow to the Russian imperial identity and return Moscow to the situation of the late 15th century, time of uncertainty and searching for itself. The 30-year successful existence of an independent Ukrainian state which regains its stolen history and cultural tradition is a clear evidence of this great theft, stealing of history and cultural heritage committed by Moscow. Inevitable changes in the modern world that Russia doesn't want or cannot accept. The Soviet Union collapsed not only because of its internal economic problems, but also as a result of the global world's transformation from bipolar to multipolar world, the emergence of a new political order, according to Samuel Huntington, civilizational approach. Samuel Huntington elaborated an interesting concept of a new international world order, based on civilization in which the most widespread, important, and dangerous conflicts will be between people belonging to different cultures. In his seminal article, The Clash of Civilizations, he writes, it's my hypothesis that fundamental source of conflicts in this new world will not be primarily ideological or primarily economic. The great divisions among humankind and the dominating source of conflict will be cultural. Nation states will remain the most powerful actors in world affairs, but the principal conflicts of global politics will occur between nations and group of different civilizations. The clash of civilizations will be the battle lines of the future. After the Cold War, world politics became multipolar and multi-civilizational for the first time in history. According to Huntington's view, civilizations are cultural entities, villages, regions, ethnic groups, nationalities, religion groups, all have distinct cultures, a different level of cultural heterogeneity. The culture of a village in southern Italy may be different from that of a village in northern Italy, but both will share in a common Italian culture that distinguish them from German villages. European communities will share cultural features that distinguish them from Arab or Chinese communities. Arab, Chinese, or Westerns are not part of any broader cultural entity. They constitute civilizations. Those civilizations is the highest cultural grouping of people and broadest level of cultural identity. It's defined both by common objective elements such as language, history, religion, customs, institutions, and by the subjective self-identification of people. Huntington emphasizes that human identity has a multi-level structure. A resident of Rome, for example, may define himself with varying degrees of intensity as a Roman, as an Italian, a Catholic, Christian, European, Westerner. The civilization to which he belongs is the broadest level of identification with which he intensely identifies. Huntington also draw attention to another important point, namely that in the modern world, improvements in transport and communication have led to more frequent, intense, symmetrical and inclusive interactions between representatives of different civilizations. As a result, the civilizational identities are becoming increasingly noticeable. The situation of complicated by the fact that each person has several identities that can compete or reinforce each other. Family, educational, professional, territorial, institutional, cultural, ideological, party, and others. Identification in one dimension may conflict with identifications in another dimension. Cultural identification is sharply increasing in importance compared to other dimensions of identity. According to Huntington, global security requires acceptance of global multiculturalism. In the contemporary multicultural world, we must reject universalism, embrace the diversity, and look for commonalities. It means that people in each civilization should seek and try to expand the values, institutions, and practices that they share with people of other civilizations. This is the most reliable way to prevent a clash of civilizations and avoid the resulting damage in all spheres of life. The policy of the modern Russia Federation is completely opposite to this Huntington's recommendation. And you can see an interesting quote from Huntington. The sources of conflict between states and groups from different civilizations are in large measure those which have always generated conflict between groups, control of people, territorial wealth and resources, and relative power. That is the ability to impose one's own values, culture, and institutions on other group as compared to that group's ability to do that to you. Conflict between cultural groups, however, may also involve cultural issues. Differences in material interest can be negotiated and often settled by compromise. In a way, cultural issues cannot. Russia's current war in Ukraine is a war of a new type, a war for identity in the sense of Francis Fukuyama identity politics. In identity, the demand for dignity and the politics of resentment, Francis Fukuyama draws attention to the fact that in the second decade of the 21st century, identity issues have come to the fore in many regions of the world. In his opinion, demand for recognition of one's identity is a master concept that unites many processes in contemporary world politics. Fukuyama's concept of identity is based on the notion of human dignity and the inherent desire for recognition of this dignity by others, which applies equally to individuals and communities. He notes that often what are perceived as economic motivation in people's actions actually grow out of a need for recognition. He stresses that it's not enough that I have a sense of my own worth if other people don't publicly acknowledge it, or worse yet, if they denigrate me or don't acknowledge my existence. Self-esteem arises out of esteem by others because human beings naturally crave recognition, the modern sense of identity evolves quickly into identity politics, in which individuals demand public recognition of their worth. Fukuyama criticized the economic model of human behavior according to which human beings are seen as rational individuals who want to maximize their utility, their material well-being, and politics is simply an extension of this maximalizing behavior. He doesn't deny that people are capable of rational behavior and are driven by self-interest in seeking more wealth and resources, but he emphasizes that much of what we understand to be economic motivation often reflects not just a straightforward desire for wealth and resources, but the fact that money is perceived to be a marker of status and bias respect. Fukuyama mentions two versions of identity politics. The first is aimed at recognizing the dignity of the individual. The second at recognizing the dignity of the community. Also, both are very close interrelated. Most people don't have infinite depths of individuality. What they think of as the true inner self is actually made up of their relationship with other people and the norms and expectations of those other people as a given environment. Humans are deeply social beings, inclined to want to conform to the social norms in which they live. When a stable shared moral horizon disappears and is replaced by a cacophony of alternative value systems, most people don't rejoice at their freedom of choice. On the contrary, they feel acute, insecure, and alienated, experiencing an identity crisis that leads them in the opposite direction from expressive individualism to the search for a common identity that will reconnect the individual with a social group or and form a new moral horizon. Fukuyama's statement that in many cases people may not know their true inner self, which in turn can lead to an obsession with the question, who are we really? Often the search for the answer to this question also causes feelings of alienation and anxiety, which can successfully exploit by various political forces by practicing the politics of resentment. In such cases, the political leader tends to mobilize his or her supporters by claiming that the dignity of the group or community has been insulted, humiliated, or violated. This sense of being offended creates a need for the group or community to have its dignity publicly recognized. A humiliated group that seeks to regain its lost dignity has a much greater emotional impact and potential for action than people who are simply motivated by economic reasons. In his book, Fukuyama cites the example of modern Russia and Hungary. When Vladimir Putin talks about the tragedy of the collapse of the Soviet Union and how Europe and the United States took advantage of Russia's weakness in the 1990s to bring NATO closer to its borders, and that he wants Russia to be treated as a great power, not a weak regional player. This is the best example of the practice of resentment politics and identity politics manipulations. Why is the Russian Empire actually naked? So, on the one hand, the crisis of the Russian imperial identity and imperial historical narrative as a result of the collapse of the Soviet Union. On the other hand, it's not enough for Russians to simply call themselves as great eternal empire. They seek recognition as such from other states and international community as a whole. But the existence of an independent Ukrainian state clearly shows that Russia as a state is very young and has only 300 years of its own history, or about 500 if we count the time of the Moscow Duchy from the time of its independence of the Holden Horde and the Crimea Khanate. The existence of an independent Ukrainian again brings Russians back to studying themselves, to asking themselves, who are we and what is Russia? In fact, they don't know what they are. And moreover, the existence of the Ukrainian state makes these questions obvious to the international community. And this is the reason why Moscow is so desperate to destroy Ukraine and Ukrainians. The Russian leadership truly believes that by capturing Ukraine and incorporating it into the Russian Federation, they will have the right to appropriate its history and European cultural identity. Russian leadership really believes that if Moscow once succeeds in occupying Ukraine and turning it into its internal colony, that Ukraine should belong to Russia forever as a part of historical Russia. And Moscow treats the Baltic countries and all Eastern European countries, as well as Germany, in the same way. In the eyes of the Russian leadership, all those countries are legitimate Russian colonies that should belong to Russia forever. That's why the Russian authorities blackmailed and demanded that NATO should return to the 1997 borders before launching a military invasion of Ukraine. Another no less important problem is the fact that the Russian leadership doesn't realize that appropriating foreign cultural tradition will not help solve the chronic problem with its own Russian identity. According to Smith's cultural concept of the nation, cultural heritage is a powerful cultural resource for the development of the nation to which it directly belongs, or at least to which this cultural heritage is close. The Ukrainian cultural tradition, as a part of the European one, is completely foreign to Russians. Anthony Smith argued that national identity is directly based on cultural heritage, linking national identity to the preservation and continuous reproduction of the patterns of values, symbols, memories, myths, and traditions that make up the cultural heritage of nations, as well as the identification of people with this particular heritage and the values, symbols, memories, myths, and traditions. Smith maintains a significant aspect of the nation as a form of community, characterized by cultural and or political identity, has been its role as a model of social cultural organization. If at the conceptual level the nation needs to be seen as an analytic category, at the concrete historical level, it can also be fruitfully regarded as a social and cultural resource, or better, as a set of resources and model which can be used in different ways in a variety of circumstances. Thus, the Han Empire in China or Akkadian Empire in Mesopotamia acted as models and cultural resources for later attempts to build empires in this and other areas. So the kingdoms of Israel or Judah and the city-states of ancient Athens and Sparta and Republic Rome provided models and guides for subsequent communities. This is not to prejudge the question of whatever or how far these societies might themselves be designated as national community, only to say that much later nations looked back to these examples as models of nationhood and drew from them certain resources, ideals, beliefs, and attachments, as well as social and cultural organization. On the next slide, you see a comparison table. It's very general, but I hope it can provide some explanation why all attempts to reform Russia along the Western lines have failed. Even so, the Russians tried. In fact, they have very little in common with European countries and European values. Russians can call themselves part of Europe only if they possess Ukraine, Poland, or the Baltic states that are truly part of Europe. This is where the aggressive intentions come from. Russia as a country on the line of the clash of civilizations. According to Huntington's civilizational approach, in countries with large groups of people belonging to different civilizations, identity issues will be particularly acute, and as these states are located directly on the civilizational fault lines, and the societies are doomed to conflict and disintegration. In his opinion, Ukraine belongs to such countries of civilizational fault line, or cleft countries, because it is divided firstly by the question of language, Ukrainian-speaking West and Russian-speaking East, and secondly by the question of religion, Greek Catholic West and Orthodox East. You see the quote, Ukraine, however, is a cleft country with two distinct cultures. The civilizational fault line between the West and Orthodoxy runs through its heart and has done so far centuries. At times in the past, Western Ukraine was part of Poland, Lithuania, and Austro-Hungarian Empire. A large portion of its population have been adherents of the United Church, which practices Orthodox rites but acknowledges the authority of the Pope. Historically, Western Ukrainians have spoken Ukrainian and have been strongly nationalist in the outlook. The people of Eastern Ukraine, on the other hand, have been overwhelmingly Orthodox and have in large part spoken Russian. Huntington cites the result of the July 1994 presidential elections as an illustration of this East-West divide in Ukraine. In the top right picture, you can see the rough division of civilization according to Huntington. And in the second picture, you can see the result of the 1994 presidential elections in Ukraine, in which Leonid Kuchma won as a representative of the Russian-speaking eastern regions. Maybe in 1994, the election results look like a reliable confirmation of the Huntington's ideas. However, we must remember that 3 years before this, in the 1991 referendum, more than 80% of citizens in all regions, including Crimea, voted in favor of Ukrainians' independence and secession from the Soviet Union. But now we can say that Huntington was wrong about this. The consolidated resistance of Ukrainian society to Russia's military invasion is the best example of it. In our opinion, there are now grounds to argue that, in fact, it's not Ukraine, but Russia that is a country that has historically been on the line of civilization clash, with a long chronic crisis of cultural identity as a construct built on artificially created myths, narratives, historical heritage stolen from neighboring nations, false propaganda and manipulation of public consciousness. Russians cannot decide who they are, part of the Western or Eastern world. This applies to both representatives of the political and cultural elites and ordinary people. On the one hand, they actively use the technological achievements and everyday comfort items of the Western world, from car to clothes, educate their children in Western university, consider themselves Orthodox Christians, but on the other hand, politically, ideologically, and in everyday life, they are more inclined to Eastern authoritarian cultures. Russia is perhaps the only country where political elites have been arguing about who they are since the 18th century up to present day. The most famous is a confrontation between debates between so-called Westerners and Slavyanophiles during the 19th century. It should also be noted that in the 18th and 19th centuries, representatives of the Russian elites didn't use the Russian language in everyday life, often not even knowing it because they spoke French or German. So both historically and in our time, Ukraine is a part of Western Christian civilization beyond the confessional divisions, Catholic, Orthodox, Protestants, which we believe are not as defining of the Christian world as Huntington believed. An example of this is a recent joint transition to the new Julian calendar of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church of Ukraine from 1st September 2023, which will mean that Ukrainians of both these Christian denominations will celebrate such holidays as Christmas, Epiphany, and other, together with the entire Christian civilized world. The last slide, I think, of my presentation. Only the collapse of the Russian Federation can give Russians a chance to finally find themselves and stop producing violence in the world. From the very beginning of its formation, Russia has been autocratic, and its core component has been and remains the apparatus of violence and coercion of both its people and the occupied peoples. In Russia, the state has never been the result of a social contract of citizens, so the totalitarian state system of the Soviet Union has been quickly restored in the modern Russian Federation. The outdated authoritarian and repressive system, seeking to protect itself, has for centuries exterminated all dissidents or forced them to migrate. The modern Russian Federation, as well as the Soviet Union, is a closed society, as Karl Popper would say, in which internal criticism and consequently changes in the political system are impossible. The lack of experience of democracy and practices of self-organization of citizens in the Russian political culture, which they could refer to and actualize, makes it impossible to create a civil society. This is why political and intellectual elites within Russia, as well as ordinary individuals within Russia, practice such models of social behavior that allow them to survive, but not to change the traditional Russian autocratic system of governance. Thus, the Russians choose the tactics of escape from freedom. According to Eric Fromm's theory of totalitarian society, the ways of escaping from freedom include the following: authoritarianism, destruction, and conformism. This explains why Russian society constantly and willingly returns to the authoritarian structure of society in one form or another. Emperor, party secretary, or leader of the proletariat, president, sincerely believing that one person, a strong leader, will be able to solve all their problems and protect from enemies. This explains why violence is acceptable to Russians who respect the right of force rather than the power of law, both within Russia and in international politics. Violence against a group of people defined by the state is seen as the only permissible way of self-realization. Therefore, war and confrontation with enemies, for example, decaying West or Anglo-Saxons, are an inherent natural context of the Russian state's existence. And this explains traditional conformism of the Russian society, conservatism of thinking with a focus on the past, with the help of propaganda, of course. Russians are doomed to run away from freedom and, in fact, from themselves along this authoritarian destructive circle. Only the collapse of the Russian Federation can give Russians a chance to finally find themselves and stop producing violence in the world. So, conclusions. Russia's war against Ukraine is a new type of war, a war for identity. Russia is not satisfied with its own cultural tradition and seeks to appropriate Ukrainian cultural identity and historical heritage in order to present it as Russian by appropriation of the Ukrainian territories, which is reflected in the imperial historical narrative of the Russian Federation, Kievan Rus, Russian Empire, Soviet Union, Russian Federation. Russian leaders want to rule a country with a 1,000-year-old history and cultural tradition dating back to the early Middle Ages, an empire without borders in space and time. Russia is historically a region of civilizational fault line between the countries of Western civilization and the countries of Eastern civilizations. is a torn state in terms of cultural identity and has maintained its integrity for centuries, only due to its authoritarian political regime, which constantly produces numerous conflicts around its borders. For centuries, Russia's authoritarian and repressive regime has killed all dissidents or forced them to immigrate, making it impossible to create a civil society and make real changes in the system of government. Russian society is locked in this authoritarian circle, which again and again returns them to the reconstruction of the only familiar authoritarian model of state management. So, thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Olena. Thank you for your amazing presentation. So many different kind of materials and conclusion, investigation. So many participants who wants to communicate. I don't just maybe Yaroslav, please. Yaroslav.
No, it was applause.
Yeah, but maybe question, maybe not.
Maybe later.
David, Luke, David, please.
Thank you very much, Elena, for that. And it's really nice to be able to listen in. I have some, I guess these are comments as much as questions. Is it really, so this is the first one, is it really right to say this is a new type of war? I mean, I think you're totally right. For Russia, it's not about the money, and it's not even political. It's an existential thing for them. But you could talk about this in a way as like a kind of botched crusade of some kind that Putin has gone on. It's driven by considerations which are really, you know, altogether outside the usual economic and political sphere. And I wonder if with Francis Fukuyama, who you're drawing on, I mean, he goes all the way back to Plato for his account of human motivation, the notion of thumos in the soul or what have you. So there's some actually something very ancient in a way at work in what's going on with what Putin is doing. So I'm not totally convinced this is a new kind of war. So that's one thing. Another is Huntington. All right. I think Huntington mixes up civilization and culture. Right? I don't think civilization is about culture at all. Civilization is about rules. And this is what makes Russians fundamentally uncivilized, because they don't understand rules. You know, they are prepared to ignore the rules. They don't care about the rules. The rules for Russians, for Putin anyway, are just instrumental. And I think Huntington actually really goes fundamentally wrong in identifying civilization with culture, because cultures can clash, but civilized people don't clash. They have discussions. You know, they talk to each other. They don't invade each other. What Russia is doing is fundamentally uncivilized. So in that respect, I think Huntington is just wrong in identifying civilization with culture. So that's another thing. And then finally, I really appreciate your detailed historical overview of what's going on and your kind of engagement with the historical narratives. But if you're right that this is all about identity and resentment, then in a sense, we can't take the Russian narrative about history seriously, or we can't take it literally. It's a proxy for something else. I mean, Putin just talks rubbish about history all the time. Just kind of makes stuff up. And it's nonsense mostly. Sorry, it is nonsense. And so in a way, it's like you're trying to argue with an idiot. You know, there's no point correcting Putin on the details of Russian history or Ukrainian history and Ukrainian identity. He doesn't care. you know, and so it's like, you know, you're a rational, civilized person trying to have an argument with somebody who just doesn't understand reason and civilization. So I want, in a sense, there's sort of a mismatch between your argument, but on the one hand, this is about identity and resentment and stuff, and on the other hand, trying to engage with the historical facts of what's going on. It kind of these things slide past one another. Anyway, those were just some observations that I had on a very interesting talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke, for your interesting comment. I think you're absolutely right. Huntington is wrong about he regards Russia as a separate civilization, but Russia is not a civilization at all. And I think there is no Orthodox Russian civilization. I think there is one Christian civilization, and Russia is a problem. In fact, absolutely uncivilized. And there is interesting thought of Ukrainian philosopher from Kyiv, Vakhtang Kibladze. He names Russia shadow of civilization. I think it's very interesting metaphor. Yes, and about Russian history, I think we can't consider Russian history, Russian historiography seriously as a separate discipline, because it's not only because I am Ukrainian, and according to Karl Popper, theory of closed society, or according to Eric Fromm, theory of totalitarian society, in such type of societies, independent history or independent philosophy as disciplines, they can't exist at all. It's just state historical propaganda projects, not separate disciplines. I think so. So thank you, Christina Buzakova, if I'm not mistaken, please.
Yes, hello. I want to say that it was a really wonderful talk. It was very, very good and very well elaborated. And I have two comments. The first one is that what was very interesting for me was that Ukrainians, they used to call themselves Rusin. And in Slovakia, and in Eastern Slovakia and in Northeastern Slovakia, we have this ethnic Ruthenian minority who also call themselves Rusin. So now I know from your talk that they actually have a Ukrainian origin, and they also have some relations to the Ukrainian culture. But then, according to the logic of Putin, Russia should also invade us, you know, because if these people call themselves Rusin, then they should have, according to their interpretation, also Russian roots, and then they would have the right not only invade Ukraine, but also us, Slovakia. And the second thing I wanted to say is that I know very well also from my home country, from Slovakia, how many times people, and I think that's very typical for the post-communist countries, are afraid of freedom, are afraid of multiple choices that they should make and they should be responsible for. So also in Slovakia, many people rather choose the authoritarian system than taking the responsibility for the choices. They also feel insecure in the freedom. So I can understand it very well. And I also want to kindly request you to cross fingers for Slovakia, as after the Easter, we have the presidential elections, and these elections will also decide whether we will belong still to the civilized world, or if we will fall into the shadow of civilization. So please cross the fingers for us, and of course we will try to do whatever we can to stay in the civilized world and to stay with Ukraine too. So thank you very much for a beautiful talk.
Thank you. I wish your country the best.
Thank you.
Any questions? Excuse me, my connection is not so good. I can be only in the black image today. Who is the next? Maybe questions, comments? Can I ask you, Elena, but theoretical questions? It's not secret for us. I know you many years from I met you in Dnipro, maybe, I suppose, and at the time of the activity of the Department of Philosophy, it is, and I know you as a very good philosopher of the history. As for me, you are very excellent specialist in this. And my questions for you, how we can differentiate historical analysis here in this case and philosophical from point of view of philosophy of history. My question connected with your brilliant presentation of historical reconstruction. But how, what is the special issue, special dimension of the philosophy of the history analysis?
Thank you. I think we can conduct philosophical investigation, philosophy of history investigation without knowing historical context. So historical context is necessary, and philosophical theories are very. We should use philosophical theories as tools for analyzing of history, and I think they are very close interconnected. And we can use one without help of other. We can analyze history without philosophy, and real philosophical investigation, philosophy of history investigation cannot be without historical context, with historical study, I think. But maybe I should think more about these questions. Thank you.
No, maybe I would like to listen some more detailed talking about maybe next time, but it's important for me to understand the special tools, special of analytical philosophy of history here. I would like to invite Tatiana, Professor Tatiana Gardashuk.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ina. And first of all, I would like to thank our speaker, Olena Mishalova, for her very elaborated talk. And I just, it's not a question, maybe some brief comments and remarks. The first one, yes, the identity issues are extremely important for nation self-identification, for state identification, for people identification, because still now we are still witnessing such discussion between some European countries about attribution of certain names as a way of national identification, because for instance there is still a discussion between Polish and German people about Copernic. Is he German scientist or Polish scientist? The same between German and Czech about the way of argumentation of this identity are really very important, and it depends on the kind of discussions or dialogue between countries. And the second remark is that yes, we all agree that this war is an existential war, and it is war for identity, but I wouldn't underestimate other aspects of this war. And even because the very complex nature of this war, very complex, this war of indeed this war of not only for identity, but also it's informational war. It's also war for resources. Let's remember about the Crimea and water for Crimea and Easter and other kind of resources. So it's a very multidimensional war, and this is why it's so cruel and it's so complicated issue for analysis, for understanding, for many Western experts, scientists, analytics, and this is why it is also not so easy to find the solution of how to stop this war
Thank you.
from
I agree with
global
you.
points of view.
Thank you.
This
I
is
agree
my
with
view.
you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But this war has very interesting feature. As a rule, Russia is aggressor, and as a rule, aggressor don't want to be those people who they has occupied. But Russia wants to be. I don't say victim, but they want to be something who they are not. Something who they victims are, in fact. That's why I focus on analyzing this dimension of this war. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please.
Please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for a very interesting issue. I would like to make not question, but some notice. I think that Russians very well understand their own identification. As you know, they would like to import to disseminate, to extend Russian world on other countries, especially on Ukraine. So this is war when Russians teach Ukrainians like to be special right Russians. And this is not about Russian identity, maybe more interesting Ukrainian defense, because we now understand our own identity. And in Russian version of history, of cultural history, of political history, we every time excludes very important time for European political and cultural history. I mean the latest Mid Ages and Renaissance. So this very important time, we don't know clear in Ukrainian history, because in a Russian version of Ukrainian and Russian similarity history, Russian cannot describe, cannot prove their clear European identity, and this is a very big problem for Russian, because Ukraine never need to open a window in Europe. Ukraine every time was part of Europe, but for Russian, it's very important to be close with Ukrainian, because this proof their European basis, cultural basis. So I think that this is not only about identity Russian. This is something about identity, like political rules, like citizenship, like strategic political perspectives, and now Ukrainians defend their country not for be more Ukrainians, but for be in new strategic perspectives, which Russia can't explain or can't propose for any countries, including Ukrainian. Thank you, but you today hold this very important issue for our war. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Thank you.
And I would like to follow for our participants who please, Henrik, one thing.
Yeah, thank you. I think actually my colleague Satoru was raised his hand a bit earlier, but anyway, I can just ask my question. So thank you very much, Ellen, for your talk. That was very interesting to me, full of historical detail, and I think yes, what I learned is that there indeed is a dimension of explanation of this war and invasion that goes beyond economic interests. But on the other hand, I'm very critical of stereotypes. So when one says Russians are like this, and someone in the discussion said Russians don't understand rules. I mean, I do not think that there are really characteristics of characteristic traits of nations or so that have a great explanatory power. But I think I learned a lot from your talk, and so the thought that Russia as a state has a problem with its self-image and self-conception, that's that's very interesting. But may I ask you for a little clarification? So when you talk about Eastern civilization, could you briefly characterize what you mean by that? Say what you mean by that.
It's a general shape. I mean Chinese civilization. I mean Arab civilization, India civilization. It's not some concrete Russian Far Eastern civilization. Not about Eurasia concept of modern Russia. Not. I don't mean this.
Okay.
Thank you.
It's about dividing between the Western civilization and several Eastern civilizations. But I don't think that Russia is one of the Eastern civilization. Russia is not a civilization at all. I don't know what is it, what they are. I'm not a Russian historian, glory to the God, and not a Russian philosopher. So it's their job to investigate who they are.
Thank you, Saturday.
Thank you for questions.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So thank you very much for very interesting talk. I think the angle of identity is a very good one to analyze the current situation and also past and so on. And I just have one single question. Terminological question. Because both Russia and Ukraine are multi-ethnic countries, when we talk about Russian or Ukrainian, it can be a bit confusing because it can refer to either nationality or ethnicity. So my question is whether when you use words like Russian or Ukrainian, whether it means the, for example, Ukrainian nationality or the Ukrainian ethnicity.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the question, and I think we should use in the 21st centuries only political concept of nation.
Mm-hmm.
It means that Ukrainians are all who has Ukrainian residence.
Mm-hmm. So, for example,
Russians are all who has Russian residents, but I think Russian leadership considers this question in another way than I am.
So, for example, Crimean Tatars, so they are also Ukrainians in sort of full sense.
Yes, from yes, from
but
the
then it's a bit confusing when you say, you know, well, maybe not. I was misunderstanding, but you said like Crimean Tatars, for example, have much closer connection to what you call Eastern civilization, and if you say like Ukraine has nothing to do with Eastern civilization, it kind of raises some questions. So I think, as always, history and culture is quite complicated, and like if we, it's I don't have like any alternative notions, but I just wanted some clarifications on this matter.
There are two concepts, two conceptions of nation: ethnical nation and political nation. And of course, for Europe, normally national concept of nation, ethnical concept of nation is more familiar. But for example, such countries as the United States, Canada, and I think every modern European country, if we consider this all these countries, we can use now ethnical concept of nation, because every state, every European and not only European country is very multi-ethnical.
Yeah.
So we can rely only on the political conception of nation. And according to this, yes, Crimean Tatarian are also Ukrainian, but not ethnically, politically.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Maxim Vak, please. I don't listen you, please. Microphone.
We don't hear you.
Microphone.
We still don't hear you. Maybe you can write your question in the chat. I understand it.
Switch on microphone, please.
It's some technical problem, I suppose.
While Maxim is trying to ask his question, I would reply to Ellen. So remark that she doesn't know who are Russians, and I can cite Mykola Gogol from Mykola Gogol expression from Dead Souls, мертвые души, прореха на человечестве, holes on humanity. So just it's.
Any questions, comments, remarks?
I'm sorry.
It's great.
Eventually figure out. I just use a tablet instead of computer and did not have any idea how to do it. Kind of almost going to repeat already what was asked, because all my questions were taken, but I still would like to have a reply. So I think Luke was asking that. I don't see. So the main thesis that it's a new war for identity. Yeah, it's the principal thesis of your presentation, but I don't see how it's new. I know since Hobbes already spoke about their three motivations for war, and one of them is fight for glory or recognition or identity, however you take it. And I know Hegel is driving the whole development of society out of the war for recognition. The war of recognition is the principal moment of driving. So yeah, it's a fight for identity. It's how modern world is shaped. So in this sense, I don't see what exactly new in this war. As well as kind of, in addition, kind of, again, this division, Russia is Eurasian country, and them kind of blaming its Asian side on dictatorship or totalitarian state. Again, I don't see how it works. I know not all Asian countries are totalitarian. So, and I have some question about there, but I think that's enough. And I'm sorry, of course, thank you for the presentation. I was kind of a little bit flustered with my mic, so I lost my footing.
Thank you. I understand your question because why this is a new type of war? Because I don't know another war where aggressor, one side of this war, pretend to be not they are in fact. Russians don't want to study themselves. It's they have their own culture. I think they must have their own culture, but they don't want to study. They don't want to be proud of it. They trust to want to appropriate our culture tradition and pretend that this culture traditions is Russians, is their own. It's not normally. I don't know another war like this. So it's really a new type. Can you imagine that Roman Empire said, for example, for example, Great Britain Empire regards Indian history or Egypt history as own Great Britain history?
Yeah, but Roman Empire did. Roman Empire basically want to appropriate Greek history. I
don't agree that the Roman Empire appropriated Greek history. They used Greek history, Greek philosophy, but they don't appropriate. They don't call themselves Greek.
No, but them
want to do it. And Roman Empire created a lot of interesting things to the world, and but I can say so about Russians.
Roman Empire appropriated Greek gods and called them their own names, so there we are. And them again, question of identity and appropriation. I don't know what country studies its own culture. I don't know. And I agree. I think there is a mixing of terminology. Yeah, there is a resentment or resentment, and resentment is through and through. And resentment is based on negation of that. So for me, it's more negation of the Ukrainian culture, the existence of Ukrainian, them appropriation of them. And them, of course, is process of creating of myths. So I just a little bit, I'm not sure about appropriation that they want to appropriate, they want to negate Ukrainian culture, negate Ukrainian existence. Through this negation, they want to assert themselves. Appropriation, I'm not sure how far we take this term.
Thank you for your comment. For me, Russia is a very interesting phenomenon for investigation, for further investigation, because it's a unique country. It's a country with stolen territories, with stolen naming, with stolen history and cultural identity. I don't know what they have their own, apart Russian missiles. But as far as I know, most part of Russian missiles are not Russian too. So
no, I agree with I agree with all of that. I don't see the principle to it. Okay, but thank you, of course.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Yaroslav, please. It's not only applaud now; it's a question.
Thank you for interesting talk. So my question is about you said it about what Russia is. So you presented Russia as a homogeneous so unity, so Russian Federation. But do you take into account this still this multinational character of Russia? All these nationalities: Tatars, Buryats, Chechens, Caucasian peoples, and so on. So, or do you think they have no chance to revive? I mean, they are completely Russified. And in this connection, your conclusion, do you think still that Russia has a chance within its internationally recognized borders? I mean, or it should disintegrate at the end, in particular to these national parts, so to say, like Yakuts and other. Do they play this role, their own independent role, so to say, in this phenomenon of Russia, of modern Russia?
Thank you for the question. According to Mr. Putin, Russia is a country without borders in space, without borders, and I think it's impossible. So Russia should have its borders somewhere, and I think all these people from East and Far East of the modern Russia Federation are under occupation, from my point of view, and they should be revealed. I think maybe they can do it, but I don't know. But they are occupied people. I don't know if they are Russian, because I don't know who are Russians at all. So, but I think that the collapse of the Russian Federation is the only way, only possible way to create normal state for Russians, for another people within the Russian Federation. Because if Russia will be divided into several smaller countries, there's no, and these countries will be not so aggressive, I think it will give change. It will give chance to finally to transform this authoritarian system apparatus of violence and coercion, which is still in the basis of the Russia state. And the current Russian leadership are not intent to transform it. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina, and after that, Eduard.
I just want to say that I want to react on the question or the comment of Maxime. I think I would agree rather with Ellen about the question of appropriation of the Ukrainian culture by Russia. Because I think that when Maxime was talking about Greeks and Romans, basically the Romans, they never used to say that Greeks are not Greeks, but they're just some branch of Romans, you know? And the same is also in case of destruction. So basically, they were colonizing Greece, but they were not saying there are no there are no Greeks, there are no Greeks, they are just Romans, just like us. And another question, for example, we can talk about the destruction when we talk, for example, about the Nazi Germany and the destruction of Jews and Jewish culture, you know. But this is again not what the Russians are doing now. They, on one hand, are doing a genocide on Ukrainians, but on the other hand, they say that there are no Ukrainians, they are just Russians like us, so their culture belongs to us. The Nazi Germany never wanted to appropriate the Jewish culture, but this is what the Russians are doing with Ukrainians. So I want to say that in this question, I entirely agree with Ellen. I see it in the same way.
Thank you.
Eduard?
Thank you. Yes, I have only one question. Excuse me, my bad English. We are talking about Karamzin, Solovyov, but no words about Feofan Prokopovich, Yavorsky, Ukrainian. You do not say about Yin Dugin, Surkov? Why?
Thank you. I mentioned Karabzin or Solovyov as an example of historical books with Russian imperial historical narratives. They're just best examples of it. I don't use these books as sources, as historical sources, because, as I said, I don't think that Russian historiography is should be seriously treated, because Russian history is just a state historical propaganda project. I mentioned also Mikhail Hrushevsky. So Solovyov and Karabzin they're just for the example. And I wanted to notice one interesting project, historical project. This project was launched last autumn. It collected 90 historians, some part from Ukraine, but bigger part not from Ukraine. And this project is headed by Sergei Plakhy, by Yaroslav Gritsak, and Timothy Snyder. And the main goal of this historical project, I think that in some 3 or 5 maybe years, we can be able to advise our foreign colleagues some English language literature, historical English language literature about Ukraine. Because from my own experience, it's very hard. I understand our foreign colleagues, because it's very hard to get to know anything interesting and anything trustworthy. I mean, historical books, in English language historical books, because all these books are written by the example of the Russian historical books. And as I said, Russian history is an ideological project, propaganda project, state propaganda project. So maybe in some nearest future, we can be able to recommend more interesting books about Ukraine in the English language, written in the English language.
But who are looking for now the Russian identity? This is a federation, nation, or this is a philosophy of Russia? Who are looking this identity in Russia now? This is singular.
I can't give an answer. I should think about it, because I didn't investigate the Russian identity. It's I think it's very very complicated issue. It's this topic. I need a book to be written.
There are murders. Who are looking for in this country this Russian identity? This Orthodox identity, this is a tradition. What is identity Russia? For whom?
I don't say
For whom?
about it. I don't say.
For me, for you, who are looking? Yeah, it's my question. Yes, thank you. For me, question.
Thank you for your comment.
Any comment? Somebody else wants to ask or comment? So many issues were arised, so many thoughts and so many doubts that we have to understand, to think, to analyze it for our future discussion. Maybe I would like to, excuse me again, I'm afraid to open my window, because I follow for our continuation of our seminar. And my questions, I come back to our Berlin seminar, thank you, Yaroslav. Thank you, Professor Lumer. And thank you, Sergei Secundant, Professor. I remember this talking about subjectivity. Who are the subject? Who are the personal subjectivity who are responsible for war, for this event? And I remember it was difficult questions for discussion. It was trouble for our reason. It's we will to continue to think, and I understand that topic that we discussing today is closely connected with the problem subjectivity. Who are the subject? What kind of identity? And I have some trouble about this generalization of the Russian. As for me, just now I don't know what is the answer in my trouble, but I feel that we have to think about identity and subjectivity. Thank you. And somebody else? Thank you very much for your attention, for your desire to be here with us, to analyze so complex questions. We need to be maybe brief and in our mind to open our reason, and it's not so easy. And Olena today provokes us in many dimensions. It's a great pleasure to be here with you, to listen, to analyze, to have some doubts and counter arguments. Thank you.
Dear
Thank you,
colleagues,
everybody.
for coming. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have to continue, and we will think about our future seminar postscriptum April. If you have a desire to be speakers, if you have some scholars who would like you to invite for our communication, please, it will be very good for our dialogue. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ina, for your efforts in organizing our seminars.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Be safe and take care.
Thank you.
Be safe.
Good. Goodbye.
Інна Володимирівна.